So, in this section, we will discuss some simple blood tests that can help investigate your health status a little further. We do believe that the body temperature and pulse measurements alone can be very insightful, but we understand that some people want blood work done as well. You can, of course, get a lot more in depth than what we will cover in this module, but we don't think that that's necessary to assess general health. So, for blood work, we're going to discuss full thyroid panel, cholesterol, glucose markers, vitamin D, prolactin, and PTH. If you have a cost-effective way to get blood work done, that could be a good first step to establish a baseline. And then you can get follow-up blood work done 3 to 4 months later after making the changes we suggest in this course. But we completely understand that blood work can get expensive, and sometimes insurance doesn't cover it, or your doctor may not write you the script. If you have a good doctor that can write you a script, you can utilize these metrics. Otherwise, you can use resources like Jason Health or functionalhealth.com to more freely order your own blood work without a doctor's script. But do not stress if you're not able to get blood work done at this time. It can get expensive, and that's okay to not get it done right now. Meaning it's not necessary in order to fix your metabolism and overall health, because assessing body temperature and being in tune with your symptoms can really go a long way. So let's start with assessing your thyroid system with blood work. So unfortunately, most doctors just use TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which is produced by the pituitary gland to tell your thyroid to produce more thyroid hormone. The idea is that high TSH shows your thyroid that it can't keep up. But TSH is influenced by so many other things than just thyroid alone, like aging, stress, infection, blood sugar, etc. So ideally, the blood work also includes T4, T3, and reverse T3 levels as well. So more of a full thyroid panel. And so ideally, we have low TSH, low reverse T3, and high T3. So first up, TSH. So ideally, TSH is at 1 or less than 1, and a TSH greater than or equal to 1.5 has been shown to increase risk of death due to coronary heart disease. Elevated TSH is also associated with elevated cortisol levels, and TSH greater than 1.5 to 2 is a definitive sign of hypothyroidism, and you are more susceptible to a host of thyroid complications. Now, a TSH less than 1.5 doesn't necessarily rule out hypothyroidism, need more investigation, which is why a full thyroid panel is helpful. RT3, so reverse T3. As we mentioned in the previous module, we naturally have small amounts of reverse T3, but overproduction of reverse T3 is dangerous since it can bind to T3 receptors on cells while not increasing the metabolic rate like having elevated T3 levels does, since reverse T3 is inactive, whereas T3 is active. So in effect, with high reverse T3, it can actually block T3 at a cellular level, lowering the metabolic rate. RT3 production can increase with illness, stress or inflammation, starvation, low blood sugar, and hypothyroidism. Now, if you think about it, reverse T3, RT3, is an evolutionary adaptation. During times of stress, famine, or starvation, reverse T3 increases to slow your metabolic rate and conserve energy. Another situation where the body overproduces reverse T3 is when the body senses too large of an amount of T4, such as will be the case of a hypothyroid person with a conversion defect using only T4 medication. So the overproduction of reverse T3 happens as a reaction to the accumulated T4, resulting in a strong antithyroid effect. So that can definitely help you assess whether your thyroid medication is actually helping you or hindering you. So next up, T4 and T3 levels. So it's helpful to look at T4 and T3 together, and so we'll go through a few situations. So first situation is if you have normal or high T4 with low T3. So this could be a sign that your thyroid hormone conversion issue is happening maybe in the liver, and so you need to work on supporting your liver and improving health, because your liver is going to be what helps you convert your inactive T4 into active T3. Another situation would be low T4 plus high or normal TSH. So this is suggesting that the thyroid gland itself is actually being blocked and can't secrete thyroid hormone. And this can be a result of estrogen dominance or high levels of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, in the bloodstream. And the third situation, kind of more acceptable T3 and T4 levels. So ideally, we want T4 to be in the middle range, so 0.82 to 1.77, kind of closer to 1.3 in the middle. And that is measured in nanogram per deciliter. So I understand that other blood work tests could have different metrics, but ideally, we really want to be in the mid range of what your test presents for T4. And then for T3, we want to be in the mid to upper range. So in a range of 2 to 4.4, ideally we want to be in the high threes, like something like 3.8 or higher. That's where we're going to see really optimal health. And this is measured in PG per milliliter. So again, I understand different blood works may have different units, but ideally we're sitting in that upper range for T3. And it's really at that combination where you're likely going to see higher body temperature measurements for your at-home body temperature measurements. But please know that it is not end-all be-all. It's not end-all be-all. If you have low levels or a poor thyroid system, the human body is amazing and your thyroid system can and will improve when given the tools. It's also important to remember that these tests for T4, T3, TSH, RT3, they are snapshots in time, and your hormone levels can vary day to day due to, for example, acute stress. We still need to look at our symptoms and our health objectively, since sometimes we can still have good thyroid blood work, but potentially blocked thyroid hormone pathways. And so it's important to, again, make sure that we're still doing our body temperature and pulse measurements. So here's some examples of some problems that can help with cellular utilization of thyroid hormone that may not be reflected on blood work. So you may have blocked transport proteins in the bloodstream. You may have decreased or blocked number of thyroid hormone cell receptors to actually be able to accept the active thyroid hormone and utilize it. And metabolic dysfunction can actually cause problems, preventing our cells from using and metabolizing thyroid hormone. So another blood work test that can provide some insight is cholesterol. Cholesterol is not an end-all be-all test since it is, again, a snapshot in time, but it does provide some insight on your metabolic function and thyroid health. Thyroid hormone regulation and cholesterol metabolism are connected. We need active thyroid hormone T3 to convert cholesterol and produce protective steroid hormones. Cholesterol should not be demonized since it plays a number of important roles in our body. For example, the synthesis of bile acid, proper nerve function, hormone synthesis, and immunity. So we don't necessarily want low cholesterol like mainstream tells us. The cholesterol range 200 to 240 milligrams per deciliter has actually been shown to have the lowest all-cause mortality in the research. Moreover, in neurodegenerative diseases, those with higher cholesterol values generally have more positive outcomes than those with lower cholesterol levels. More than 20 studies now show that older people with high cholesterol in this 200 to 240 range actually live the longest. In fact, a meta-analysis from 2021 concluded that too low and too high might correlate with negative health outcomes, as shown by these U-shaped curves in the slide. So here's a quote from Dr. Ray Peat, quote, "After the age of 50, low cholesterol is clearly associated with an increased risk of dying from a variety of causes. A study of old women indicated that a cholesterol level of 270 milligrams per 100 milliliters was associated with the best longevity. Mortality was lowest at serum cholesterol of 7 millimoles per liter, 5.2 times higher than the minimum at serum cholesterol 4, and only 1.8 times higher when cholesterol concentration was 8.8. This relation held true irrespective of age, even when blood pressure, body weight, history of myocardial infarction, creatine clearance, and plasma proteins were taken into account," end quote. So low cholesterol is not necessarily a good thing. Below 200 and especially below 160 is actually a health risk factor. This could be a sign that you may need more retinol, more sunlight, and potentially more fruits and sucrose sources and less starches. Now, we don't want high cholesterol. We're not saying that. So really above 240 is a sign of low metabolism, since it is an adaptation to lower thyroid function and chronic stress. because with low thyroid function, you can't convert cholesterol into sex hormones, and so cholesterol rises and builds up accordingly. I used to be so proud of my high cholesterol level when I was low carb because there was a group called lean mass hyperresponders saying that high cholesterol was normal for low carb individuals. Little did I know at the time that those high cholesterol blood work tests were literally screaming thyroid deficiency. There's actually an abundance of literature on this topic about high cholesterol and its relation to hypothyroidism. So it's pretty clear. Here's some quotes. Quote, lipid levels increased in a graded fashion as thyroid function declined. These results confirm that thyroid dysfunction is common, may often go undetected, and may be associated with adverse health outcomes. So here's another quote from another research paper. Thyroid function regulates cholesterol synthesis and degradation and mediates the activity of key enzymes. The cholesterol-lowering effect of thyroid hormones mainly occurs through an increased expression of LDL receptors at the hepatic and peripheral levels. The fact that T3 regulates LDL receptors was discovered more than 40 years ago after the observation that in conditions of hypothyroidism, LDL cholesterol elimination was reduced, end quote. And yet another quote from the research, quote, in mammals, thyroid hormone depletion leads to decreased LDL receptor expression and thus elevated serum cholesterol. The clinical association in humans has been known since the 1920s. So I include a few more quotes in the script for this module that you can check out below, but it's pretty clear and well established in the literature that high cholesterol is a sign of hypothyroidism. So for total cholesterol, we want to be somewhere in the 200 to 240 range. If you're at like 250, don't stress too much about it. But ideally, we're sitting in the 200 to 240 range for total cholesterol. However, there are some more nuanced tests that you can get to better assess your cholesterol. So you can do LDL particle size. So ideally, you have more of what's called pattern A, and this is large and buoyant particles versus pattern B, which are small and dense. So some research has shown that the pattern B, small and dense particles, actually pose a greater risk of heart disease relative to pattern A because those small and dense can easily build up. You can also check out HDL. So HDL, high is good, but we don't need to shoot for super high because super high HDL can actually be a sign of elevated endotoxin, which can cause some gut problems. So another test is ApoB versus ApoA1. So ApoB contain particles that transport triglycerides back to muscles and phospholipids, and it is this number that is correlated with heart disease. So if slightly high HDL, but you have low ApoB, then there's not too much to worry about. And lastly, triglycerides. So triglycerides should be low, and if they are high, this could indicate a sign of insulin resistance since cells cannot properly utilize glucose and the body is excessively using fat for fuel. So along those lines, let's discuss some blood work markers that can help us better understand how well we are currently utilizing glucose. Remember, optimal health, high body temperature, and high CO2 levels, these are all achieved when we are good at utilizing glucose. There are a lot of variables in our environment and food system that work against us, like plastics, environmental toxins, and PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. So getting this blood work done can help you assess your starting point. Now, there's a lot of fear-mongering in the health space about blood sugar, but the pattern on the screen here is actually what we're looking for after we eat a meal. We want blood sugar to rise after the meal, as this is the point of eating, to give us energy. Then, a body that handles and utilizes glucose well will then return our blood sugar back to baseline shortly after. So a small bump and then back to baseline. We want to avoid having consistently elevated blood sugar levels, as that's a sign that we are not good at utilizing glucose, but we aren't looking for a flat line. Not consuming carbohydrates may result in low fasting insulin levels, but you could still have insulin resistance since the carbs are being avoided. The goal is to have good metabolic markers while you're consuming carbohydrates, and that's a sign of good metabolic health and optimal health. And this involves removing the metabolic brakes that are hindering your ability to utilize glucose, which we discuss in this course. So, back to assessing glucose utilization with some metabolic markers. First up would be fasting insulin. So, quote, normal is described as less than 20, but we want to be in more of the mid to low end of the reference range for the panel that you take. And for fasting glucose, which measures the glucose level in your blood after an overnight fast, and this is moderated by your body's ability to respond to insulin. So ideally, this is 90 or less, and measures of 100 to 125 milligrams per deciliter, that can indicate prediabetes and some insulin resistance. And then 126 milligrams per deciliter or higher can indicate diabetes. And then another metric that is commonly performed for some metabolic panels is what's called hemoglobin A1C. And this estimates your blood glucose levels over the last 3 months, kind of like an average. So it kind of helps determine how well your body is at managing glucose, and it can be affected by hypothyroidism and made worse by chronic oxidation of fatty acids. So ideally, this is close to 5. Now, if you have a blood glucose monitor, you can also run some at-home tests where you eat a meal containing carbohydrates and you measure your blood glucose before the meal, right after the meal, like an hour after the meal and 2 hours after the meal, to just kind of look at what your pattern is. So again, we want to see a bump up and then go back down to baseline. So if it remains elevated for 2 hours after the meal, that is a sign of some hindered ability to utilize glucose, but do not stress because these metrics can totally be improved with some dietary and lifestyle changes. So here are some other metrics that can provide some insight. Simple standard blood work panels. So vitamin D or 25 OHD. This should ideally be in the 50 to 90 nanogram per milliliter range for optimal metabolism. And low vitamin D has been associated with some thyroid problems, and a deficiency of vitamin D can actually be thyroid suppressive. So it can be something that can be holding you back in improving your metabolism. So next up, prolactin. So the optimal level is less than or equal to 10 nanograms per milliliter. So prolactin blood tests can be used as a proxy for serotonin and estrogen, and is actually better than blood serotonin or blood estrogen tests. So plasma prolactin is a good indicator for its levels everywhere in the body, while estrogen and serotonin can be low in the blood, but then high in the tissues. And we do not want elevated estrogen or elevated serotonin. So prolactin is like estrogen. It does have necessary functions, but it's usually elevated due to stress. So elevated prolactin suppresses thyroid, increases estrogen, and then estrogen increases prolactin. So it's like a lose-lose. Elevated prolactin also increases cortisol, makes you feel sluggish and brain foggy, and is associated with stubborn skin problems, hair loss, hirsutism. So prolactin is a really good metric to just kind of assess if, elevated estrogen or elevated serotonin are potentially your issue right now, as the blood work for estrogen or serotonin can sometimes not give you a good indication of what's actually being stored in your tissues. And lastly, PTH, parathyroid hormone, to help gauge calcium status. However, this is not the only way. So your serum calcium could be fine, but if PTH is elevated, you may be pulling calcium from your bones to maintain that blood level of calcium, because that blood level of calcium is very well regulated by the body. It's very important to keep that in order for you to survive. So the more calcium you eat, the more serum calcium should be in the middle to upper range with low PTH. High PTH is antagonistic to thyroid hormone and could be a sign that you are potentially not eating enough calcium in your diet. So that about wraps up this simple blood work assessment module. Again, you don't have to dive super deep to get an idea of what's happening at the systemic level for your body. Because remember, when we improve how the body functions as a system, there's that saying, rising tide lifts all boats. And so if we improve systemic function, that's going to really help how all the individual systems operating in the body are working.